Thank you, Stefan. I want to thank you all for coming. What Stefan said is right, and it's remarkable to me because as I was driving down here this earlier today, I was thinking, my gosh, I can't believe that it's actually been 4 years since I came to this room and gave a talk about my previous book. And I'm thinking, you know, from my perspective, 4 years, it's gone by really fast. It doesn't seem like all that much has happened. I've written some more books. I've had a chance to talk with a lot of people. But then I was thinking, my gosh, in Google time, 4 years is incredible. I mean, think how much must have changed here. So when I came here 4 years ago, I had a very specific point that I wanted to make to people, which was that we don't draw enough. And we tend to not think very well because we don't use our visual mind very well. So my first book was all about solving problems with pictures. And I realize now, as the years have gone by, that a lot of things have changed in these last 4 years in terms of helping us think visually. There have been a lot of books that have come out about visual problem solving. There's been a lot of interest around creating applications that people can use to help them articulate software that are more visual. And there's been a whole slew of tools that have been released online, many of them belonging to you, that allow us to communicate using pictures a lot more effectively than we could in the past. But I also realize that we're not there yet. In these last 4 years, we haven't gotten to the point where we've solved all of our problems. We still seem to have these challenges ahead of us. And what I really wanted to set out to do as I was working on this new book was kind of double down and say, if my first book was just about using pictures, what I want to talk with you about today and what my new book is about is using that combination of words and pictures to make every idea that we have become incredibly clear. Because I think that the story I'd like to share with you is a pretty simple one. As I think about the ideas that are out there, there are so many of them, and we now have so many different channels by which people communicate their ideas to us, it all starts to sound after a little while like this, just this endless wall of words, of blah, 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 descending upon us. It's really difficult to begin to understand what are the ideas that we really want to pursue? What are the things that are really interesting to us? So what I want to share with you today is this simple idea of, can we move from a world that looks like that to a world where maybe we can start to think about how we can communicate our ideas better by using fewer words. We're still going to use words, but we're going to help make those words become incredibly powerful by introducing the idea of combining them with pictures. And so I think that the best way to start out to make this real is I'd like to start out with kind of two different case studies of organizations I've worked with over the last couple of years, and they represent kind of a spectrum to me. On one side, an organization that has used pictures exceedingly well to explore really complex ideas, and then that's the good side of the spectrum. And then on the bad side of the spectrum, an organization that hasn't used pictures at all and communicates miserably. So I'd like to start with the good one. On the good side, a couple of years ago, I had a chance to go up to Seattle and work with a number of the program managers that are overseeing the development of the new 787, the new Dreamliner, arguably the most complex machine that has ever been made. And what they shared with me is it's even more complex than I had thought, because the 787 is being built at the same time in 17 different countries by people speaking 13 different languages. So for example, the fuselage section in the front, everything that's in light blue, is built in the United States. Everything that's in green, the main fuselage component, is being built in Italy. Everything that's in red is being built in Japan. Everything that's in yellow is being built in China, etc. So the question I had is, how is it possible for someone in, say, Shanghai, let's say the person who's working on the wing root, to know how to build their component to within tolerances of, in some cases, millionths of an inch, so that it perfectly lines up with a component being built by someone in Italy and a component being built by someone in Japan. All the pieces get shipped back to Seattle and they snap together and they fit. Well, the thing that they showed me up at Seattle is the reason they're able to do that is because everything, every aspect of the design, maintenance, construction, training, everything that has to do with that machine is communicated through pictures. It's as if they've replaced spoken language completely. And I'm not just talking about really sophisticated computer-aided design. I mean, Boeing has had that for decades. What is interesting here is the creation of a global network of a visual language, so that if I have a question about what am I supposed to do, I don't need to read anything. I go online, I look at the picture, and I see what I'm supposed to do. And the really remarkable thing is that in the end, it actually flies. It works. So that's a really good example. That's the good end of the spectrum. And I promised you that I'd show you a bad end of the spectrum as well. So I want to talk to you about an organization where I think communication doesn't work at all. Now, I have had an opportunity to work with the United States Senate and a number of different governmental organizations, and the reality is people are incredibly smart, people are working very, very hard, but the problem is that often, because it's all about politics, the ideas that this guy is generating, he wants to make absolutely sure that this guy does not understand. I want to make sure that you don't know what I'm doing. It's secret. This is my political agenda. Well, that's part of the problem. The other problem is that even when those people agree on what they're trying to do, the result of their work looks like that. Think of how invested you have to be in this piece of policy or this idea to be willing to drill all the way down through it to try to figure out what's it really about. It doesn't work. It doesn't fly. And in the end, we end up with people who become really politically agitated because they don't know what it is that Washington is actually trying to say. What is the solution? We don't know. So what I want to share with you is something that I think is a tool that can help clarify this. How do we use the pictures and the words, put them together? This is something that I call vivid thinking. Now, vivid is a mnemonic. Now, I am one of those people, my memory just sucks. It's not anywhere near as good as it could be or as I'd like it to be. So I rely on mnemonics and visual devices all the time to help me remember things. So let me walk you through what vivid actually stands for. So the VI stands for visual. The V stands for verbal. And the ID stands for interdependent. So if we put that together, what do we have? Visual, verbal, interdependent thinking. That's the kind of thinking I want us to have. And then an idea will become truly vivid. Now, there's a more vivid way to describe that. So what it means is I'm no longer going to believe that you know what you're talking about if you can just talk about it. No matter how articulate you might be, I'm not going to believe you have fully explored your idea if you can only talk about it. Nor am I going to believe that you have fully explored your idea if you can only draw it. Vivid thinking means that we will combine both. And for some neurobiological reasons that we'll talk about in a few minutes, this is the really critical factor. When we want our mind to light up on an idea, when we have an idea, we want to share it with someone, when we combine words and pictures, which most of us have never been taught to do, it's almost magic that happens the way it lights up other people's minds and our own. So what vivid thinking really is, for anybody who has an opportunity to look through my book, vivid thinking in the end of the day is a very simple set of tools that, since most of us believe we are primarily verbal, and that's what we've been taught in school, so our default thinking process for most of us involves writing or speaking. What Vivid does is it gives us a very simple set of tools to overlay on top of those words and say, if I had to create a visual to complement those words, what would I do? Because I don't know how to draw. It tells us, vivid thinking tells us exactly how to do that. The reason why this works, there are a couple of unwritten rules about visual problem solving and vivid problem solving, and I want to share with you the most important one. It goes like this. Whoever best describes the problem is the person most likely to solve the problem. Now, what I mean by that is, if any of you are in a position to assign budgets or to assign work to others, and I'm assuming many of you are, if someone came running into your room and said, give me money, the sky is falling, I'll fix it, you're probably going to say, not so fast. But if the person came in and said, look, I've started to map out the problem, and I've realized that when these people or these constituents get together in this way, there seems to be a series of consistent outcomes. And what I'd like to do is explore why this one always goes badly. Could you give me some more money to explore it? The fact is, the person who has already begun to map out the problem is the person who proves that they have the greatest grasp of it, and also is beginning to find what the solution is likely to be. So the really mercenary subtext here, and this is true, is whoever draws the best picture gets the funding. Absolutely true rule number one, whoever draws the best picture gets the funding. We don't see this rule very often because we don't draw very often. But every time somebody does, they win. And I want to show you the best example of this ever, the best sort of back of the napkin, simple visual idea ever. So we're out here in the Bay Area. Let's fly out here to Washington. As I've mentioned, I had a chance to work with the Senate and the US Navy and some other organizations in DC. And after one of my talks, a guy came up to me who was head of the new policy for the United States Senate, for the Democratic side of the Senate. And he said, Dan, I have the perfect, simple picture, back of the napkin story for you from politics. And he shared this picture, and it goes back to 1974. So we're talking kind of ancient history now. When President Ford was in power. President Ford ran a very conservative, fiscally conservative administration. There was a very popular economist at that time. His name was Arthur Laffer. USC economist, very conservative in his views, who spent a lot of time in DC doing consulting for the Ford administration. So one night, Arthur Laffer goes out to a bar with two senior aides to President Ford. They go to a bar in Washington, DC, and they start talking about taxation and monetary policy. And at one point, Laffer pulls out the cocktail napkin and he says, guys, I have an idea. Do you mind if I draw a little picture for you? And the two guys he's with said, no, go ahead. So on his napkin, Laffer draws a very simple little XY plot, something I'm sure all of us have done at one time or another. And since they're talking about taxation, on the horizontal axis, he maps out the percent tax rate that the government is charging on our income from 0% up to 100%. And on the vertical scale, he maps out how much money does the government actually collect in tax revenue from $0 up to lots and lots of dollars. And he says to the guys that are there in the bar with them on this napkin, he says, okay, so if the government charges us 0% income tax, how much money is the government going to make? 0. And then he said, but think about this. If the government charges us 100% income tax, how much money is the government going to make? Also 0, because no one will work. Think about that. If every single penny of every dime of every dollar that you earned came in one pocket and you immediately had to pay all of it back out in income tax, what would be the point of even working? You might as well just forget about it, just go to the beach. So he said, he drew on his napkin, what actually seems to happen is there must be some kind of a curve that goes like that. And at some point, isn't it interesting that reducing the rate of taxation actually increases the amount of money the government collects? Now, the two guys who were with Laffer that night in the bar thought that was pretty interesting. These are the two guys. They said, can we take that napkin back to show it to President Ford? There is a fundamentally interesting idea in that drawing. He said, please take the napkin. They took and they showed it to President Ford, who was very intrigued by the idea. He got it. He liked it. Ford passed that napkin off to the Republican National Committee, who then passed that napkin off to the economics team of a guy named Ronald Reagan, who was thinking of running for president. And quite literally, that napkin sketch became the basis of Reaganomics. That is the first instance anywhere in the public record of anybody ever talking about what became known as supply-side economics. The idea, when someone would come to President Reagan and they'd say, wait a minute, in order to increase taxable revenue, government revenue, you're going to decrease the rate of taxation, especially for the wealthy? What? He would draw them out that picture. And they'd say, oh, I get it. Now, the interesting part about this story is the two guys who were with Arthur Laffer that night in the bar are these two guys. Former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and former Vice President Dick Cheney were the two guys who were sitting in the bar that night with Arthur Laffer. It was those three guys with that cocktail napkin who basically invented Reaganomics that night in that bar. That became pretty much underlying American economic policy for most of the last 30 years. And we are still debating to this day, is it a good idea or not? But here's the question I have. Who says a simple little sketch on the back of a napkin doesn't have power? It has extraordinary power. That's what I was referring to when I was saying whoever draws the best picture gets the funding. The person who comes up with the visual clarity of their idea always wins, for a very simple reason. We are of two minds. And I am not talking about left brain and right brain thinking. Everybody's familiar with the idea of right brain and left brain thinking. One of our hemispheres is creative and one's analytical. No, it is nowhere near that simple. Now, one thing we do know is that the brains of all mammals, all mammal brains, have a bilobed neocortex. The part on the top of the brain is split in half. But as far as we can tell right now, to the limit that tests allow us at this point, humans seem to be the only mammal in which it is true the two hemispheres have evolved to have slightly different function. And now we are beginning to realize what the difference between the two hemispheres of our brain really is. And it boils down to something like this. One half of our brain has evolved to become really good at looking at the world in terms of little bits, pixels, little bits of focus. The other half of our brain has evolved to become really good at being the glue that pulls them back all together. So there's another way of looking at this that says this part of our brain has evolved to be really good at focus. Somewhere in our evolutionary past, it was very important for us to be able to scan the horizon and see the one thing that we wanted to go get. But if we only focus on that, we're going to be attacked by something from behind us. So the other half of our brain evolves to be really good at peripheral vision. Pretty fascinating. What we're starting to find is that half our brain is really good at the focus, and the other half is good at the larger picture. That's what we know. Another way to think about this, the way this has further evolved, one way to diagram this out, looks something like this. One half of our brain does want to see the world like that. Little bits, letters, words, can I break it down into its elemental pieces? The other part of our brain wants to say, that's not what it's about. It's about the whole thing. Now what's interesting is both of these are the same, and yet of course both of these are completely different. Which one is right? Is this the right description, or is this the right description? Well, the answer of course is that both of them are the right description, but this is the only one that for most of us in most of our education we are ever taught to develop. We're given verbal syntax, we're given verbal grammar, we're tested on our ability to write a 5-paragraph essay. Our intelligence is judged by our ability to be verbally articulate. When has ever anyone given us a tool? A real tool, in the same way that we have grammar and syntax. When has ever anyone given us a tool that helps us with that part? And yet, actually, this part is bigger than that part. We are more visual than we are anything else. More of our brain is dedicated to processing vision than any other thing that we do. And it's ironic to me that we haven't got tools to take advantage of that. So that's what we're going to focus on now. And to kind of get us moving, I'd like to do a little test with you. Very simple. I'm going to show you 4 pictures. All of them are going to look something like this, and they just go in order A, B, C, D. What I'd like you to do is just look at the 4 pictures. And this, I don't want anybody to stress out. This isn't some kind of test where we need to look for the hidden banana or something like that. I just want you to look at these pictures and see if you can identify that there are some things in the picture. So this is picture A. Do we all agree that there are some things in this picture? Okay, so now I'm going to go on to picture B for a moment. This is picture B. And I'm going to go back and forth a few times. I don't want anyone to stress out. I want you to actually see the differences. So I'm going back to A now. This is A, and this is B. I'm going to go back again, A and B. And let's go back one more time. And this time as I go from A to B, I want you to ask yourselves a question. How much time do you think might have passed between A and B? How much time do you think might have passed? Anybody? Seconds? Some number of seconds? All right, I think so. So now let's continue. This is picture C. I can hear that many of you are seeing that something else has happened. And now let's go on to the last picture, picture D. And we can see that something else has happened. Now I'm going to go back to C for a second. And I want you to ask yourselves the same question. Between C and D, how much time has passed from this picture to this picture? Hours. So the first transition took place in a number of seconds, and this transition took place in a number of hours. And we're pretty much all in agreement with that. But here's the really remarkable thing. We did all of that without the need to rely on a single word to describe anything that we were witnessing. And yet every one of us saw almost exactly the same thing. If we were to be debriefed later, most of us would say we had witnessed exactly the same thing. It didn't require a single word to do it. Now, we know that that's the case. But we don't think about it very much. And that's what I want to do for the rest of this time. Take advantage of building some tools to help us bridge the gap to move from being good at this part and knowing how to being better at that part, and then how to apply it to our own ideas. How can we make this relevant? So all of us, I mean, my gosh, in particular, all of you who work at Google, what are we really in? What business are we really in? We're in the business of ideas. And the trouble with most ideas is that they start out kind of like this. This is like a pile of coal. they're ugly, they're undifferentiated, they're poorly defined, but like a pile of coal, they have incredible potential. But jokingly people say, what's the worst gift you can give to someone is a lump of coal, because nobody wants to touch it. This is exactly like our initial idea. We know in our mind that we've got the potential of something great. And often what happens is we go no further than this, and we bring it to our colleague or our boss or our investor or what have you and say, fund me. And people are like, no way, I'm not touching that. They don't realize the potential is in it. So what we're going to do with this vivid thinking and the napkins and pens that I handed out to you is I'd like to show you a tool, a visual verbal tool that will help us take any idea from its undifferentiated, kind of ugly, nasty starting point to becoming something that is so crystalline and so beautiful that nobody ever wants to forget it. And the really interesting thing to me about this metaphor is, of course, we recognize that these two piles are exactly the same thing. A pile of coal and a diamond are exactly the same thing. Both of them are 100% carbon and nothing else. The problem is, in order to get from this one to this one, we have to go through a process. And what I want to help you do is figure out what is the process we can go through to make our idea become like that. So here's how we're going to do it. You have your napkin. I want you to draw with me now. We're going to draw out that process. We're going to draw out that tool. Now I hope everybody has something that you can rest your napkin on, because you take those ballpoint pens and you're going to dig through that napkin. So you're going to have to put something on it, otherwise you're going to end up drawing on your pants. So here's what we do. When we want to draw a problem-solving picture, we don't panic. We don't think, oh, I don't know how to draw. The first thing that we do is we just draw a little circle. And literally in the upper left-hand corner of your napkin, I'd like you to draw a little circle. And then that's the visual part. But now let's activate both sides. Let's get the verbal part in there too. Give it a name. What am I going to call that circle? And I'd like you to call it me. And for a little bit of extra credit, let's let the visual side of us take off. Go ahead and make the me look a little bit like you. So we've gotten started now. And now what, if we drew one circle as our starting point, what might be a logical next step? Well, how about we draw another circle? And let's make another little one down in the lower left-hand corner. And I'm going to call this one my audience. And let's make that one look a little bit like someone to whom we're always trying to explain our ideas. I'm going to make it look like my mom, because I'm always trying to explain to my mom what exactly it is that I do. So go ahead. So now we've got these two. And our mind is leaping forward and saying, okay, I've got the two pieces, me and my audience. That's me, that's my boss. This is me doing my perf. That's the person who's going to overlook my perf, whatever it is. To whom do I need to show this? And then I'd like you to draw a big circle in the middle. And this one, I'd like you to call my idea. Now what we are going to do, and we're doing it visually, we're doing it vividly, we're allowing our mind to relax, because we can continue to look at the picture even as we describe it. Something neurobiologically powerful is happening by virtue of the fact that we can look at this picture as I describe it. Our mind actually relaxes because it doesn't have to remember anything. It's able to follow along. It's able to see what the words mean at the same time. So now let's say we've got this idea. To just explain our idea all at once is going to be a bit like that pile of coal. It's going to be largely undifferentiated. So what we're going to do is we're going to break our idea down into 6 different slices. Just like take that idea as if it was a pizza. We're not going to force someone to eat the pizza all at once. We're going to give it to them slice by slice. I'd like you to divide that idea up into 6 slices. And what we're going to do for the rest of the time here is label those 6. And step by step, I'm going to walk you through another mnemonic device that is a nice tool to use when you've got your idea and it begins time to start qualifying it and clarifying it. So here's what I want you to do. In the 6 slices, I'd like you to write the following letters: F, O, R, E, S, T. And what does that spell? Forest. It spells forest. That's going to be our mnemonic. It spells forest. Now, why is that? Well, number 1, because it's mnemonic that I can remember. Number 2, it also helps us remember that when we want to clarify our idea, it takes work. The first pass on our idea is not the one we want to show to someone else. It's not vivid yet. The trouble for most of us is we work in a really stressful environment. Very often, the environments in which we are working, and I know here at Google you have done many, many things to try to alleviate this, but for a lot of the working, the people that are out there working, we have to go into a brainstorming session. We're under continual pressure. There's noise, there's crashing, there's lots of stuff going on around us. The reason I like this idea of the forest is because it reminds us that when it comes time to take our idea and make it vivid for someone else, it is worth finding the time, if only in our own mind, to find a kind of a quiet place like a forest where we can spend some time making sure our idea is really vivid before we start running around and sharing it with someone else. So here we go. We're going to work through all 6 of these, and we're going to do just a couple of minutes and an example for each one. And I'd like you to follow along with me as I go. So what F stands for is form. And go ahead and draw a little box with that. And if you want to go ahead and make it like a cube, go ahead. F stands for the first thing that we want to find to make our idea vivid is we want to find the idea's form. What is its underlying shape? So that is the form of a bicycle. I don't need to describe a bicycle with words. I can draw a picture and everybody can see what it is. Now that's great if my idea is a mechanical object. But what if my idea is more abstract? What if my idea is a business idea? Something that's not as easy to draw as a bicycle. Often what happens is when we want to describe to someone the form of our business, we write a business plan. But let's be honest, how many people actually want to read that? Nobody is going to read that business plan. We're looking for the form of our idea in as encapsulated a way as we can so someone else can see what we're talking about. Nobody's going to read that. Well, what is that? Does anybody know what that is? That's a TV dinner tray. Now, we all live in the Bay Area, so of course we have a lot more sophisticated tastes, so we have a bento box. But it's the same idea. We can understand the form of our meal because everything fits into its own little zone, into its own little box. Well, now there is a really interesting guy out there who has created a way to create business models in a bento box. Now what he's done, Alexander Osterwalder, brilliant book, Business Model Generation, has used vivid thinking as well as anybody ever could to say, when I want to communicate my business idea to someone, what I do is I just divide business up into these 9 different categories, my partners, my products, my propositions, and all I need to do to build any business is be able to populate each of those aspects, each of those different segments in my bento box, and look for the relationships between them, and I can start to describe any business idea in a way that doesn't require an entire business plan and is very dynamic and people get. So that's what I mean. This is the form of business. We need to find the form of our idea. O stands for only essentials. And let's draw a little drop of water there. Now what I mean by that is that for our idea to stick in someone else's mind, the first thing we want to share with someone else is the essence of the idea. That could be the form, but it's the essence of it. What is my idea in the end of the day really about? Now I have done some work with the Navy, and what was fascinating to me is there I was at Naval War College and I was working with a room of very smart people, and they introduced me to a term called bluff. B-L-U-F. Now, I had never heard of this term before, but what it means is that in the armed forces in the Navy, there is a standard. If you're going to deliver a message, you remember bluff, which stands for bottom line up front. If you want to be heard, you give the bottom line up front. You do not come in with all the details. You figure out what the end point is. You figure out what the essence of your idea is. You go in and you start your presentation with that. Why would you do that? Because then it gives your audience the opportunity to decide for themselves whether the rest of your idea is worth their time or not. Rather than sitting through you having to go through a preamble, you say, this is what it's about. This is its essence. And if that appeals to them, then they will give you all the time in the world to go back through the details. I thought that was pretty compelling. So I want to give you an example. This is a network diagram from one of our local Silicon Valley companies that describes their network security model. This was an advertisement in a magazine, and it was not a magazine for people who are experts in computer technology. I don't think that this is a very good explanation of the essence of an idea of security. I was reading The Economist magazine 2 months ago, and I saw an ad from Google. This was the ad that described Google's security policy in The Economist magazine. I thought, brilliant, talk about the bottom line up front. If I'm reading The Economist magazine, it's highly unlikely that I am an expert in technology security. What I'm interested in is what do I get from it? What is the benefit for me? Talk about bottom line up front. Google's verification process is 2 steps. First, you got to get past the bear, and then you have to escape from the snake pit. That's what security means to us. Now, that's intriguing. I'm interested in that company's security model. Now I will go in and I will get into the details of it. Don't give me that. I don't know what that means. Give me that. Plus, it's clever, which helps a lot. Plus, it shows F, the form of the idea. R stands for recognizable. And let's go ahead and draw something simple. Draw some water with the sun over it. An image that all of us can, genetically encoded to recognize what that image is. What do I mean by recognizable? For our idea to be vivid, it has to be something that the moment someone looks at it, they say, oh, I know what that is. I've seen that before. When we show our idea to someone, what we don't want that to have happen in their mind is them to say, what? I don't know what that is. What we want them to say is, I got it already, now give me more of the details. So this is, they tell me, this is a map of business strategy, as it's taught in some of our better business schools. I run a business, it doesn't look anything like that. I don't know what this is about. I am not going to take the time to read this. It may be visual, but it is certainly not vivid. Businesses do not look like that. Now, what is this a picture of? This is a picture of the ocean. We all know what that is. And something interesting, sort of visceral happens when we look at this. I don't know about you, but I look at this image and I say, I recognize it. That's the ocean. That's what I see out there every single day. There's something intriguing about the possibilities of an ocean. What would happen if I was able to sail out there, way out into a place where no one's been before? What's beyond that horizon? I want to go there. The best-selling business book in the last 5 years is a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. And I will tell you, has anybody ever heard of this book? Blue Ocean Strategy has absolutely nothing to do with the ocean. Nothing whatsoever. The original title for the book was about something like, maximizing shareholder value to leverage synergies in a competitive, non-competitive landscape, etc. Something completely unmemorable to someone who's not an expert. But what the authors did is they said, we think that the idea in this book can be made to be something that is instantly, almost genetically recognizable. What are we talking about? The appeal of going out into a blue ocean that is unexplored by making their book title Blue Ocean Strategy. Is this an absolutely better strategy book than any other strategy book that's out there? Well, maybe. It's a great book. But is it really that much better? What makes it become such a great idea in our mind and so memorable is the fact that we recognize the image immediately. So I spend a lot of time with business books, and I was looking over what have been the best-selling business books of the last few years. And every one of them has a visual, recognizable aspect to the title. So does anyone want to guess what this business book might be? This was a business book called Switch. This one is called Drive. This one, anyone want to guess what that one might have been called? A very popular business book 3 years ago, driven entirely by a picture. Anybody ever heard of the book called The Long Tail? This is Linchpin. Anybody want to guess what that one might be? Made to Stick. Made to Stick. This is, of course, our Blue Ocean Strategy. Anybody, can you see what that is? Purple Cow, about marketing. Anyone know what this book might be? The Black Swan. Anyone guess what that one might be? The Tipping Point. What do you think this one is? The World is Flat. Anyone want to guess what that is? Blink. Exactly. Okay, now think about this. This book and this book were written by the Heath brothers. Massive best-selling business book. This book and this book were both written by Malcolm Gladwell. Incredibly phenomenal best-selling business books. What is it? This is also Seth Godin and Seth Godin over here. What is it that the leading idea people of the last 10 years, what is it that Malcolm Gladwell, the Heath brothers, and Seth Godin know that hundreds of thousands of other business authors seem not to? If you can make your idea a visually recognizable idea. It is something that will stick in people's minds instantly, and they will decide immediately to follow up on it. That's what I mean by making it recognizable. E stands for evolving. And what I'd like you to do here, let's go ahead and draw a square that makes its way into a diamond. Evolving. A vivid idea, what I mean by this is a vivid idea is one that starts out really clear. Yes, it has great form. Yes, it's only the essentials. Yes, it is recognizable. And on top of that, is it an idea that the person we're showing it to can contribute something to it? The idea is complete, but it's not finished. Now, what I mean by that is, Leonardo da Vinci, way back in 1438, invented the first parachute. He didn't actually build one, but he drew it in one of his notebooks. And Leonardo went really far because he actually specified how big you would need to make a parachute, how much fabric you would need, etc. He came up with all the quantitative measures. Now, he never actually built the parachute. It took 300 years for a Frenchman, Lenormand, to actually review Leonardo's original drawings and go and build a parachute and jump off a tower outside of Paris and live. Took 300 years for someone to have the guts to do it. And Sasha, of course, it was a Frenchman who did it, right? So then another guy comes along 100 years later and continues to refine the parachute, and we got up to the parachute that we have today. The point I want to make is that the idea of a parachute is vivid because the original part of the idea is something we understand. And we can continue to incrementally evolve that idea, and it just gets better and better because the original idea made such great sense. My favorite example of a business person who is the greatest example of someone who could evolve an idea is a guy named Edwin Land. Edwin Land is the second most prolific, second number of patents of any American ever. Thomas Edison was the first, Edwin Land is the second. 458 patents to his name. He was the inventor of the Polaroid sunglasses. He was the inventor of the Polaroid camera. He was the inventor of the cameras that were held on the U-2 spy planes that were flying over the Soviet Union during the Cold War. He invented incessantly. And what everyone who knew Edwin Land would say is the way he worked is he would lock himself in a room. He would go without eating for 3 or 4 days. He would be one of those people, like Steve Jobs in a way, that someone would have to bring food and remind them, you've got to get back, you can't just work on your product all the time. But he would incessantly work on it, continuing to refine it. And then he would come out with this thing that was almost perfect in its form from the first go. And people look at it and say, you are such a genius. Did that just come out of nowhere? No, it came out of coming up with a good original idea and incrementally evolving it. And that was the history really of the Polaroid camera that for decades was this incredible success. Well, even Edwin Land, as brilliant as he was, could not have anticipated the arrival of the digital revolution, which spelled the end of Polaroid. So Polaroid, sadly, which such a great example of one time a great industrial company, in about the year 2001, finally went bankrupt. Polaroid is back now. Investors have gotten together, started Polaroid again, and you know who is the chief creative officer of the newly reborn Polaroid camera? Is Lady Gaga. She's actually the chief creative officer of the new Polaroid. Talk about a company that is willing to evolve itself. That's what I mean by a vivid idea. We understand that the idea is good. How do we need to change it to make sure that it stays topical? S stands for spans differences. And let's go ahead and draw something that looks like a balance. 2 circles that are balanced. Now, what I mean by this is that a vivid idea, one that other people are going to remember, like that diamond, is one that doesn't just have one point of view. It doesn't just say this. It doesn't just say black or white or right or left. It actually spans both. Now, the best example I could come up with for this was it has been a rule in automotive engineering forever to say that if you wanted to design a car, right from the beginning you had to make a decision. Was your car going to be efficient or was it going to be powerful? Because inherent in the limitations of the internal combustion engine was that binary distinction. And when you set out to design a car, the first thing as an engineer you had to decide is, which one am I going for? And for 100 years, that was the driving model behind cars. But that doesn't make any sense. It makes sense given the limitations, but then a couple of other guys got together and realized the problem with that distinction isn't that that's a valid distinction, it has to be one or the other. The problem is the engine that we're using. What would happen if instead of saying we have to make a car that's efficient or powerful, what would we need to do to make a car that is efficient and powerful? Well, the first thing we'd have to do is come up with a different engine. And so the Tesla is born, and literally that was the thought process that the founders of Tesla went through. You end up with a Tesla now that is more efficient than a Mini and more powerful than a Hummer. The breakthrough wasn't in saying, gee, an electric engine would be a great thing to put in a car. The decision came from saying, not the eternal. Almost all engineering starts out by us making binary distinctions in putting out our initial spec. It's either going to be this or it's going to be that. And those limitations are inherent in us moving forward. The brilliant, vivid ideas come from not being willing to accept the binary distinction of this or that, but by saying what I want to do is both. What do I need to change in my thinking to do both? That's where you get a breakthrough like the Tesla. That is a truly vivid idea. And the last one, a vivid idea is targeted. Now what I mean by that is we've been talking about, remember the first circle that we drew was me? And now we've been talking about our idea, going through all of these different things, and for the most part, in our sort of forest, we thought about, okay, what's the form of the idea? What would be its essentials? How could I make it recognizable and yet still evolving? And how could I make it be both this and that? But that's an exercise that we could largely do by ourselves or with our team. And that's great, that gets us partway there. But there's one piece that's missing, which is the person that we have to show it to. Up to this point, we've been working on our own. Now, the last piece is targeted. Let's go ahead and draw a little target. And what I mean by that is, a vivid idea is one that recognizes who its audience is. And isn't pandering, it's not tailored to that audience, but it says it recognizes that different people are going to find something compelling, different things in my idea. Can I think through who's going to look at it and what would make it most compelling to them? So my favorite example is, this is a cup of coffee. And back in the old days, Grandpa's time, they'd say, I could buy that cup of coffee for 5 cents. And then when I was a kid, you could buy it for 25 cents or maybe for 45 cents. And then someone came along and said, wait a minute, this is an undifferentiated commodity. It doesn't target to anyone. It's just one size fits all. What would happen if we went out and realized that there are actually different people out there who might react to want different things out of that cup of coffee? What would happen if we targeted it and we refined it so you've got one version for this group and another version for that group and another version for that group, and all of a sudden this thing that was a commodity business at 35 cents a cup becomes a specialty business at $3.75 a cup because it became targeted. And out of that comes the possibility of taking one original idea and not thinking, what are all the things I could do with this idea, but thinking, who are all the different people that might find this idea appealing, and what could I change in it incrementally to make it very appealing to each one? And you end up with, from this, we get, an entire range of hundreds of different varieties, all of which, in the end of the day, make it more interesting, more engaging, and something more of us want to buy more of. That's really the end of the prepared remarks I have. I want to wrap up with one kind of final quick bit of history. Where did we get to this point? But what I'd really like you to do, if there's anything you could take away from this, take that little napkin drawing, and I mean this. Really think this through because it will work. You've got your idea, or your team's idea, and you have to convey it to someone else. Think through, how could I give my idea form? If I had to draw a picture of my idea, what would that picture look like? How could I boil it down so that if I had to deliver my idea, bottom line up front, what would be the bottom line that I would say first? How would I make my idea recognizable? What kind of visual metaphor that people have seen before can I find for my idea? How can I make sure that my idea is complete, but it's not finished? It's got room for someone else to add their part. How can I make sure that my idea spans both this and that, not just this or that? And then in the end say, and now that I've done all that, how can I figure out who's most interested in my idea and how would I need to tweak it to make it most interesting for each one of those people? And I promise you that if you do that, that idea is going to start to move from that coal, that lump of coal, to start to become that diamond in your mind and in the mind of the people you're showing it to. I'd like to conclude with just a couple of minutes of why does any of this matter? Where did this come from? Well, clearly at some point in our past, the fact that we are so visual, that we react so well to these visual metaphors, must be driven by the fact that we needed to see the thing that was out there ready to hunt us down in order to get away from it. We weren't talking about it, we needed to see it. We've got a lot of visual processing to see it. But somehow over the last 32,000 years, we've started to shift. We've shifted a lot, in fact. Here you have the 16,000-year history of how we have gone from visual language to strictly verbal language, at least in the West, at least in the European languages. So the caves of Lascaux, people drew a bowl 16,000 years ago. Then 5,000 years ago, if we move over to Egypt, you had hieroglyphics, and someone's drawing a bowl that doesn't look too different. And that meant bowl. Bowl was a very important part of the Egyptian economy, so you draw a picture of a bowl. But then someone also realized that some ideas are too conceptual to be able to be easily represented, so let's just draw a simpler picture to start to mean something else. So the Phoenicians came sailing across to Egypt, saw the hieroglyphic bowl, copied the head of the bowl, and in Phoenician, this was called Alf, was the name of a calf. So they borrowed that symbol and said, let's go ahead and use that as the symbol for Alf. And then over time, the Phoenicians simplified that symbol, but you can see that it's still a bowl. And then it was borrowed by the Phoenicians continued to evolve it, and it becomes the letter Aleph, which becomes the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet, which then the Greeks borrow, turn one more time, and it starts to become Alpha, and then which we borrow and simplify and make the letter A. So here we have sort of 16,000 years history of how we've gone from that symbol all the way to that symbol. Now it's remarkable what that has done for us, because we know that our ability to think using this type of symbol is incredibly fluid and flexible and powerful, especially in the digital age. But the question I want to leave you with is, this is a wonderful timeline, but what have we lost along the way? Because now this has become the way that we think. And I'd just like to encourage us to remember we can also think like that. And this one is more deeply encoded in what we're going to react to and understand. So why does any of this matter to us? Because what I'd like us to do is be able to use our visual thinking to help us avoid the incessant blah, blah, blah that threatens to overwhelm us and help us make our own ideas become very vivid. And with that, I want to thank you for your time. I'm happy to stay if anybody has any questions. Thank you.